In my 40 years on the bench, I've presided over cases that tested my patience, cases that broke my heart, and cases that restored my faith in people. But this one was different. A woman of extraordinary privilege drove recklessly through a crowded parking lot, nearly struck a 4-year-old child, berated the child's grandmother when she confronted her, and then walked into my courtroom with a smile that told me she expected this to be over in 10 minutes. Let me tell you what happened, and why this case reminded me that a child's safety has no price tag, and neither does justice. The case file came to me on a Thursday morning in late spring. The charge sheet read reckless endangerment, reckless operation of a motor vehicle, and disorderly conduct. 3 charges, each one serious on its own. Together, they painted a picture I couldn't shake. The defendant, Diana Weston, 44 years old, wife of prominent real estate developer Carlton Weston, whose name I recognized from the news, a man who had built half the luxury condominiums along Providence's waterfront over the past decade. Diana had no prior record, no previous encounters with the law whatsoever. The victim, and I want to say this clearly because this word matters, was a 4-year-old boy named Marcus. Marcus was at the shopping center that afternoon with his grandmother, Rose Tatum, 67 years old. Rose had raised 3 children of her own, had recently taken on primary care of her grandson, while his parents worked long hours, and by every account in the police report, was a devoted, attentive, loving caregiver. As I read through the police report and the witness statements, 4 of them, all from different angles of the parking lot, what concerned me most wasn't just what happened to Marcus in those few terrifying seconds. It was what happened after, because that's where a person reveals exactly who they are, and Diana Weston revealed quite a lot. Let me walk you through what happened on that Saturday afternoon at the Riverside Shopping Center on Branch Avenue. It was approximately 2:15 p.m. The parking lot was busy, weekend shopping traffic, families, strollers. Rose Tatum had just finished grocery shopping and was walking Marcus back to her car, holding his hand. According to Rose's statement and confirmed by 2 separate witnesses, they were crossing a marked pedestrian crosswalk, clearly marked. Yellow lines, signage, the kind of crosswalk that every driver should see and every driver should respect. Diana Weston's white luxury SUV, a vehicle worth more than most people in that neighborhood earn in 3 years, came around the parking lot corner at a speed that multiple witnesses estimated between 25 and 30 miles per hour. In a parking lot, with families present, on a Saturday afternoon. Rose saw it first. She grabbed Marcus and pulled him backward, just as the SUV's bumper passed close enough that witnesses described the child's jacket moving from the air displacement of the vehicle. One witness, a retired nurse named Patricia Gomez, told police she screamed. She thought the boy had been hit. She was certain of it for 3 full seconds before she saw him standing. I want you to think about that for a moment. A 4-year-old boy, a grandmother pulling him backward with everything she had, the SUV passing close enough to move his jacket. This is where it gets worse. Diana Weston didn't stop out of concern. She stopped because Rose Tatum stepped forward and stood directly in front of the vehicle. Rose, this 67-year-old grandmother, her heart undoubtedly pounding, planted herself in front of that SUV and forced it to stop. That is the kind of courage that doesn't come from nowhere. That comes from loving someone completely. According to 4 witnesses and confirmed by parking lot security footage, when Diana lowered her window, Rose said, "You nearly hit my grandson. He's 4 years old. You need to slow down." And Diana's response, captured partially on one witness's cell phone video, was this: "Maybe teach your grandson to stay out of the road. I have somewhere to be." When I read that line in the police report, I had to set the folder down. I had to take a breath. Diana then attempted to drive forward. Rose didn't move immediately. Diana reportedly said, "Do you have any idea who my husband is? Move out of my way before I call security on you." A bystander had already called 911. Providence police arrived within 6 minutes. Diana was still in the parking lot, now outside her vehicle, standing with her arms crossed, telling the responding officer that the situation was being wildly exaggerated by an emotional woman. An emotional woman. Rose Tatum had just watched her 4-year-old grandson nearly get struck by a luxury SUV. I'd say she was entitled to every emotion available to her. As I continued reviewing the evidence, each piece added weight to what I already understood about this case. The parking lot security footage was clear. Diana's SUV entered the pedestrian crossing zone at a speed incompatible with the posted limit of 10 miles per hour in that lot. The footage showed Marcus and Rose in the crosswalk, visible for at least 4 seconds before the SUV reached them. There was no obstruction, no sudden appearance. Diana simply did not slow down. 4 witnesses gave statements, and every single one told the same story. A fast-moving vehicle, a grandmother's desperate grab, a near miss that left several bystanders visibly shaken. Patricia Gomez, the retired nurse, told officers she sat in her car for 15 minutes afterward because her hands wouldn't stop trembling. The responding officer's report noted that when asked to provide her license and registration, Diana complied, but repeatedly interjected comments including, "This is a complete waste of everyone's time," and "My husband's attorney will be in touch with your department." The officer documented those statements professionally and accurately. I appreciated that. What stood out to me most, what I kept coming back to as I reviewed everything, was not the recklessness of the driving, as serious as that was. It was Diana's response in the moments after, the absence of any concern for the child, the immediate pivot to status and threat, the suggestion that Rose was emotional rather than justified. In 40 years, I've learned that how someone behaves in the minute after a crisis tells you everything about their character. Diana's behavior in that minute was deeply troubling. Rose Tatum submitted a written victim statement. It was short, measured, and quietly devastating. She wrote, "I am not angry. I am asking the court to make sure this woman understands what could have happened. Marcus asks me sometimes why that lady drove so fast. I don't have a good answer for him. I'm hoping the court does." I read that statement 3 times. By the time Diana's court date arrived, my clerk informed me that the cell phone video, the partial recording captured by a witness in the parking lot, had circulated widely online. Local news had covered the story. The contrast between Diana's demeanor in the footage and the near miss involving a 4-year-old had struck a nerve with people. My clerk told me the comment sections were filled with parents and grandparents expressing exactly what you'd expect: outrage, fear, and a deep desire to know that someone would be held accountable. I understand that response. I do. But here's what I want people to know about how I approach cases with public attention. The number of views does not add or subtract 1 gram from my scales. I've said it before, and I'll keep saying it. Whether 8 people watch or 8 million, the person standing before me receives the same thorough, fair, and honest process. No shortcuts toward leniency because someone is prominent. No shortcuts toward harshness because the public wants a spectacle. What I did feel, and I'll be honest about this, was a particular responsibility, not to the audience, to Marcus, to Rose, to every parent and grandparent who has ever held a child's hand in a parking lot and understood in their bones how quickly everything can change. When Diana Weston walked into my courtroom that Tuesday morning, I watched her carefully from the moment she came through the doors. She was immaculately dressed, designer everything from what I could tell. Not that clothing determines character, but bearing does. And her bearing was one of mild inconvenience. She walked in the way people walk into appointments they consider beneath their schedule. Her chin was slightly elevated. Her expression said this was a formality she intended to move through quickly. Seated in the gallery, in the second row, was Rose Tatum. She had brought Marcus with her, a small boy in a blue sweater who sat beside his grandmother with the stillness of a child who has been carefully prepared for something he doesn't entirely understand. Marcus held a small toy car in both hands. He turned it over and over quietly while the court came to order. I looked at Diana when I called her case, and I said, "Mrs. Weston, you understand the 3 charges before this court today?" She glanced at her attorney, then back at me. "Yes, Your Honor." Clipped, businesslike. "Good," I said. "Then let's go through them carefully, because I want to make sure we both understand exactly what we're discussing." I asked her to describe in her own words what happened in that parking lot. She gave me a prepared version. She acknowledged she may have been driving faster than she realized. She said the situation was blown out of proportion. She mentioned that she had places to be and was distracted. She expressed that she was sorry if anyone was frightened. Sorry if anyone was frightened. I've been doing this long enough to know the difference between an apology and a legal maneuver dressed up as one. I looked at her and asked directly, "Mrs. Weston, The security footage shows a 4-year-old child in a marked crosswalk. You were traveling at approximately 3 times the posted speed limit for that lot. Are you telling this court you were simply distracted? I didn't see them until the last moment, Your Honor. The footage shows them visible in your path for at least 4 seconds, I said, keeping my voice level. At the speed you were traveling, 4 seconds is more than enough time to brake. What I'm asking you is whether you were paying attention. She paused. Her attorney leaned over. She said, I acknowledge I should have been more careful. I nodded. Let me ask you something else. After your vehicle came to a stop, a 67-year-old grandmother confronted you because she believed her grandchild had nearly been struck. Can you tell me why your first response was to suggest she teach her grandson to stay out of the road? For the first time, I saw Diana's composure shift, just slightly, a tightening around the eyes. Your Honor, I was stressed. Mrs. Weston, I said quietly, stress is something Mrs. Tatum experienced in that moment. You caused it. She experienced it. I'd like you to keep that distinction in mind. I turned to Rose. Mrs. Tatum, I've read your statement, but I'd like to give you the opportunity to address this court directly, if you're willing. Rose stood. She placed her hand briefly on Marcus's shoulder, and he looked up at her. She said, Your Honor, I just want her to understand what it felt like. I want her to understand that I have raised children and grandchildren my whole life. I have been careful every single day, and in 1 second, I almost lost him. Not because of anything I did wrong, not because Marcus did anything wrong, because someone decided their time was more valuable than his life. She sat down. The courtroom was very still. Marcus was still turning his toy car over in his hands. I looked at Diana for a long moment. She was not looking at Rose. She was looking at the table in front of her, not at Marcus, not at the grandmother who had just spoken words that deserved to land somewhere. She was looking at the table. That told me everything I needed to know about where we were and what needed to happen next. Then my bailiff leaned over with a note. My clerk had pulled Diana's social media history at my request following the charges being filed. There was a post from the morning of her court date, an Instagram story showing her morning coffee and the caption, dealing with a ridiculous legal situation today. Providence is honestly such a small town. Followed by an eye roll emoji, a ridiculous legal situation. I had to take a breath. I composed myself, because this wasn't about my reaction. It was about making sure she understood the weight of what she was treating so lightly. I've been on this bench long enough to know that the hardest sentences to deliver aren't the ones for the worst crimes. They're the ones for people who genuinely don't understand the gravity of what they've done, because punishment without understanding is just noise. And I didn't want noise. I wanted Diana Weston to walk out of my courtroom genuinely different from the woman who walked in. I looked at her and said, Mrs. Weston, I want you to understand something. A pause. I have been a judge for 40 years. I have seen accidents. I have seen moments of genuine human error, a split second, a distraction, a terrible mistake made by someone who immediately understood the weight of what happened. I have compassion for those moments. That is not what I saw here. Another pause. What I saw here is a pattern. Dangerous driving, no concern for the child in the immediate aftermath, a response to an upset grandmother that invoked your husband's name rather than asking whether the boy was okay. A social media post this morning calling this a ridiculous legal situation. Mrs. Weston, a 4-year-old boy's jacket, moved from the air displacement of your vehicle. His grandmother's hands were shaking when she gave her statement to police. There is nothing ridiculous about that. I let that sit. Here is what I am ordering. Every element of this sentence is a teaching moment, not a punishment for sport, but a consequence designed to give you every opportunity to become someone better than the person I see in these records. First, the maximum fine permitted under each charge, totaling $4,500, paid to the court in full within 30 days. Second, full restitution of any costs incurred by Mrs. Tatum as a result of this incident, including any medical evaluation for Marcus following the event, documented and submitted to this court. Third, 1 year of probation with monthly reporting requirements. Fourth, 100 hours of community service to be completed at a pediatric community health center serving low-income families in Providence. I want you spending your hours around children and the people who protect them, people who understand what it means to care for someone small and vulnerable. Fifth, mandatory completion of a defensive driving course and a road safety awareness program, with documentation submitted to this court within 60 days. Sixth, your driving privileges are suspended for 90 days, effective immediately. Each of these elements exists for a reason. The fines are accountability. The restitution is responsibility. The community service is education. The driving suspension is a consequence for the danger you created. Mrs. Weston, your husband's name does not appear on my docket. Yours does. And you, not your circumstances, not your social standing, not your attorney, you are responsible for what happened in that parking lot. I hope you use this time to think about who you want to be. Because the woman who drove away from a 4-year-old and called his grandmother emotional, that is not who you should be. After I adjourned court, the room emptied slowly. Diana stood at the defense table for a long moment, not moving, while her attorney reviewed papers beside her. For the first time all morning, she looked genuinely still, not composed, not performing composure, just still. Something had reached her. I hoped it had. Rose Tatum approached the front of the courtroom with Marcus beside her. She thanked me quietly. I told her what I meant sincerely. Her courage in standing in front of that vehicle, her dignity throughout the entire process, and her words to the court, those were things that made a difference, not just for Marcus, for every child whose safety depends on strangers choosing to pay attention. Marcus looked up at me. He held up his toy car. I smiled at him. He smiled back. That moment, that small, uncomplicated moment, stayed with me longer than anything else from that day. My clerk told me later that the story received significant coverage after the ruling. People shared it widely. Many were parents and grandparents who wrote to say they felt seen by the outcome, that someone had taken the safety of a child seriously regardless of who the defendant was. But I'll tell you what I told my staff. What matters isn't the response. What matters is whether Diana Weston, somewhere in those 100 hours at that pediatric center, looks at a child and understands, really understands, what Rose Tatum felt. That is the only outcome worth measuring. Let me tell you what I hope people take from this case. A child's safety is not negotiable. It does not become negotiable because you are wealthy, or connected, or in a hurry, or because you believe the parking lot rules apply to everyone else. The moment you put a 4-year-old at risk and your first response is to invoke your husband's name, in that moment, you have told the world everything about your priorities. And let me say this directly about social media. Calling a court proceeding ridiculous before you have even faced it is not just disrespectful to the process. It is disrespectful to the child it exists to protect. Words have consequences. Actions have consequences. Dismissiveness has consequences. In my courtroom, Marcus matters as much as any child whose family can hire the best attorney in the state. Rose Tatum's hands shaking in that parking lot matter as much as any statement made on official letterhead. That equality, that insistence that every person carries equal weight before the law, is the only thing worth protecting in this work. After 40 years on this bench, I still believe that with everything I have, and I always will.